science fiction comics, through film, through TV shows, because he really started to dream about these distant realms at a time where we didn't make it to space yet. We weren't in space yet. So we're really talking about the pioneers, we're talking about the front runners in the field. And the arts was really a main source for inspiration, for imagination. And then sometimes, which is very rare, but it happens, there comes a scientist who can speak and write as a poet. And the scientist is called Carl Sagan. It's very hard to sit in any event under the umbrella of space exploration and not talk about Dr. Sagan. He beautifully romanticized the story of us, the story of humans, in a way that's still extremely relevant today. And his novel Contact was actually one of the reasons why I personally wanted to take on this path. And I want to quote from the film Contact, Ellie Arroway, a young Jodie Foster, when she saw the alien world for the first time. She said, no words to describe it. Poetry. They should have sent a poet. So what is cultural astronomy, my field? Cultural astronomy is looking at space from the lens of the humanities, really. And it's led me to a conclusion that just as we need scientists to look at the how are we going to make it to these distant worlds? My question comes from an anthropological lens, which is why. Why do we want to make it to these distant worlds? And why would we even potentially need to as humans? And both questions are, equally important to fully take on these endeavors ethically, comprehensively, and also safely. Before I go into my main topic, while we're still on the topic of the importance of the humanities within the space industry, it's very important to talk about a term called the overview effect. Now, the overview effect is a cognitive shift or shift of consciousness that happens when astronauts view Earth for the first time from a spacecraft. Now, what happens is that you're on the spacecraft and an internal transition happens. Suddenly, you're slipped into an observer's perspective and you're looking from the outside in instead of from the inside out. And researchers such as Frank White, who is a space philosopher, and he wrote the book, The Overview Effect, which I recommend everyone here to have a copy of in their libraries if you don't already. And he described the term, and I quote, a state of awe with self-transcendent qualities precipitated by a particularly striking visual stimulus. Now, the most common aspects of this experience are appreciation, a deep perception of beauty, an unexpected and even overwhelming sense of emotion, and an increased sense of connection to other humans and to planet Earth. This is what happens when we see Earth from space. And this inevitably makes you a better human being, right? The effect is deeply transformative. You read interviews in this book by the most prominent astronauts. One of the astronauts in this book is our very own Prince Sultan bin Salman. And what you realize is that what they're experiencing, although in an extremely non-human environment, is very human. And it's almost sacred and mystical in nature. This beautiful sense of enchantment can be clearly defined and translated only through the humanities, only through someone who is a philosopher like Frank White, who is interested in the psychological effects of what happens to these astronauts when they're in space. Now, the overview effect happened on an international level during the Apollo 8 mission, when we were able to see the Earth for the first time, as you see on screen behind me. This is the Earthrise photo. This is the first time we were able to see home from an observer's perspective when Apollo 8 in 1968 were in lunar orbit. And every time I look at this image, I'm reminded of the famous pale blue dot quote by Dr. Sagan. You know, this is home. This is everything we've ever known. A pale blue dot floating in an eternal night. So with all this being said about the humanities, it's very important that everyone here understands there is a place for everyone in the space industry. Every space program needs artists, needs architects, needs psychologists, needs communicators, people of the law, anthropologists, philosophers. The list goes on, especially if we're looking at space as a new frontier and not just an area of study. And historically, the natives of this land, of the Arabian Peninsula, used the skies as a means of storytelling and a means of survival as well. They had an internal GPS system linked to the stars. The humanities also gives us a lens to the past. And it's very important for us to understand where we come from. And thinking in this manner is not only very progressive, but it's also the only way we will be able to move into the future holistically. It's very important, this word, holistically, like put 2-3 red lines under it. Now for my main topic, which is messaging. Messaging, before I begin, I need a clear definition of it, and its most elemental form is the integral act of signaling and getting a response. Now, there are many types of messaging. Intraspecific, which is human to human. Interspecific, which is human to other species, species raised within the same context. For example, humans in a million years, 10 million years. And extraterrestrial messaging, meaning humans to other sentient beings raised in an alien environment. I'm going to be focusing on extraterrestrial messaging for today. So imagine for a second if you were to create a symbol or a couple of symbols to represent the human race. What would it be? The human race. Yeah. Okay.
It's good to have you here in Riyadh, Lama.
Thank you.
Yes, I believe it should be a man and a woman, not just a Vitruvian man that's sent to space, which was represented by Leonardo da Vinci. Still great, but then they were going to think we have 4 arms and 4 legs. So
Okay.
it should be a man and a woman, I believe.
Thank you. I'd like to hear more answers maybe at the end of this session, but thank you because, I mean, what you said is pretty in context for what I'm about to say. You know, these attempts by these institutions were not representing a human, an individual, a nation, an institution, a company, not even a segment of time, meaning the past, the present, or the future. They were representing the human race as a species. And when you think in that manner, you have to go down to the basics. You know, the basics meaning DNA, hydrogen molecule, a planet in a solar system, that kind of thing, you know, that sort of basic. These symbols, which I'm about to show you, are what I personally like to call intragalactic hieroglyphs. And before I get into my examples of these messages that have been sent to extraterrestrial beings, it's very important to set the stage, meaning let's understand what was happening during that time. The bulk of these missions were sent in the 70s, and we're talking about most of them sent by the United States and NASA. So Apollo was finished. This was after the Apollo missions. The economy was not so great. There was some inflation, and there was little support for space programs. Manned missions were kind of suspended until the shuttle program in the 1980s. So instead, in the 1970s, NASA decided, okay, we're going to set up smaller, unmanned missions, the probes. And in terms of popular culture, what was going on at the time, this was the rise of films like Close Encounter of the Third Kind, Star Wars. This was the rise of artists like Solaris. Dystopia made its way on screen with films like Logan's Run and Planet of the Apes. And it's very important to talk about popular culture because it has a way of weaving itself into the fabric of society. And people suddenly became infatuated with the other. And the question, is there life out there, really started to become on the radar. So this is where I'm going to move to my second slide and my first example, which is the famous Pioneer plaque in 1972. This is the actual Pioneer craft. This was a first attempt by us to send a message to outer space, and this idea was the brainchild of Carl Sagan. Simply put, he wanted any alien civilization who might encounter this spacecraft to know who made it and how to contact them. Very simple. And although Pioneer 10 and 11 were primarily intended to do humanity's first major introduction to our own solar system, but it inevitably made its way to interstellar space. So I'm just going to quickly verbally explain the symbols on Pioneer plaque and then move on to other examples. So we had a hydrogen atom, which is the most common element in the universe. Scientists always hoped that the hydrogen would serve like the Latin on the Rosetta Stone, right? This key of bringing two entirely different worlds of expressions together. And then we had a pulsar map, which provided a when and where for our species' existence, and then human figures. Ammar, human figures, as you mentioned. It was hoped that these human figures would act as the organic entities, a symbol of the organic entities that created these probes. And the image did have a male and a female. They eliminated clothes for confusion. And the very interesting discourse that happened here is that there was a lot of concern about the race of these figures, which was later edited to be a better representation of humanity. But the other issue was the idea of it being a little gender bias. The man seemed very strong and confident and cheerful, and the woman standing behind him seemed a bit standoffish and a bit passive. And the man had his hand raised in greeting. The woman didn't. Her hands were completely by her side. And what's really interesting here is that these issues are completely lost on any extraterrestrial audience, right? But they're very significant and in that they are clues of who were the inhabitants of the third planet in the 1970s. And then there was also a symbol of the solar system, which was a bit out of scale, symbolizing the birthplace of the probe. So Pioneer plaque was really a shot in the dark, a complete shot in the dark. And they only had a few weeks to compose this timeless universal message from Earth. The creators chose to create this plaque with just a single greeting. And even if it was successfully decoded, the recipients would probably learn very little about us except time and place. So this takes me to our next example, which is Arecibo. Now, although, due to, I don't want to take much time in explaining the symbol, so you have the explanation on the screen. of each icon, but I'm going to just quickly mention that after the Pioneer plaque was rapidly conceived and produced just days before liftoff, Frank Drake, who was the director of the National Astronomy and Ionosphere Center in Puerto Rico, authorized Arecibo. Now, this was the most powerful transmission ever sent to space. It was aimed at M13 star in the Hercules constellation. This transmission was so strong that it was detectable throughout the galaxy. The most interesting part about Arecibo is that the message itself, as you see, is binary, but once it's decoded, it becomes pictorial. And just like Pioneer plaque, the content was autobiographical. It wasn't a narrative. So you have, as you can see very quickly, human figure, the population of Earth, the year, the solar system, the double helix of the DNA, the atomic numbers of the building blocks of life. Now, we go to 1977, the famous Voyager golden disk. These were two interstellar probes, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2. They were the predecessors of Pioneer. They were launched to take advantage of a favorable alignment between Jupiter and Saturn. And after the launch, the decision was taken to send up Voyager 2 to take a closer look at Uranus and Neptune. Now, Voyager is still operational on the outer boundaries of the heliosphere in interstellar space, and they still, till today, collect and transmit useful data to Earth. Now, aboard Voyager was the famous golden disk, another attempt by Dr. Carl Sagan to toss a bottle into the cosmic ocean. But this time, it was a bit more thought out. It was more of an international endeavor. It was a very romantic and poetic time capsule, and a more complex shot in the dark that holds a beautifully curated installation inside. Now, the aluminum cover, as you see, has the first puzzle, which is how to play the record. And I'll go through the symbols very quickly. On the top left, you have the circular image, which is the record itself, and instructions on how to play it using binary codes. Beneath it, you have the horizontal line, which is the correct positioning of the disk. And then beneath that, which I want to take a minute to explain, is the pulsar map, the same pulsar map which was on the Pioneer plaque. This provides a where and a when for our species' existence. How? There's 14 radiating lines, and each line represents a different pulsar. And there are small intersecting lines like crosshatches on each one. This indicates the pulse, like each pulse of a pulsar, like a fingerprint. And if you triangulate at least 3 of them, our position can be located. And the rate of change in the pulsing of the star, if calculated correctly, can give you an accurate determination of exactly when the probe was released. And this is very smart because pulsars are astronomical entities, so they remain active for millions and millions of years. The top right, you have the video waveforms and scan triggers so that the viewers can calibrate their instruments, also with binary numbers. And then under that, you have the successful image, the circle, if the scans are correct. And then beneath that, you have the same hydrogen atom, which was on Pioneer, again, the most common element in the universe. And then beneath it, you have a small line that specifies a unit of measure and a unit of time used throughout Voyager and Pioneer. Now, to the most interesting part of the disk, what was in it. So it's a beautiful 12-minute sound essay, which loosely translates our path to the stars before life appeared on this planet. It began with Kepler's mathematical treatise, Harmonicas Mundi, converted into sound. And then came natural sounds of Earth, like the ocean, volcanoes, earthquakes, thunder, and then humanity, social sounds, tools, agricultural work. And followed was a Morse code of the Latin phrase ad astra per aspera, which means to the stars through difficulties. And after that, you hear the difficulties, which was the slow rise in technological sophistication, a horse and cart, a jet engine, and then a Saturn V liftoff. And concluding sounds of the essay are electromagnetic waves of a human brain juxtaposed with those of a pulsar. And I really want to mention the quote by the subject whose brain waves were recorded. And she says, "My recorded life signs sounded a little like recorded radio static from the depths of space. The electrical signatures of a human being and a star seemed, in such recordings, not so different, and symbolized our relatedness and indebtedness to the cosmos." Few final notes on Voyager. So the people of the committee felt this was such a pivotal moment. You know, they were deciding, can you imagine, pieces of music that would probably have almost eternal life. You're talking thousands of millions of years. There were also photographs on Voyager, 115 photographs related to nature and to science and to human activities. And the record also had 50 greetings from languages all across the globe. And the Arabic one, which I personally love, إلى أصدقائنا في النجوم يا ليت يجمعنا الزمان. And what was really interesting about this is that these messages were not standardized. They were actually left for the volunteers to come up with and write their own. The music was also chosen to be aboard the Voyager disk as a symbol that music is a mathematical language. So it has indigenous music, but it also has jazz, rock and roll, and classical. And a fun fact about the classical music aboard Voyager. So in researching Beethoven's Cavatina, they found the composer had actually written, "What will they think of my music on Uranus? How will they know me?" Beethoven apparently toyed with this idea that his music might leave Earth for outer space, and fittingly enough, Voyager 2 did indeed pass by Uranus carrying Beethoven's music in it. So, isn't that a lovely thought? Now, before I go into my final example, which is a present day one, it's very important to convey both sides of every story. You know, there's an opposition and the reasons behind it. Initially, attempting to communicate with extraterrestrial beings was not really viewed as a risk. But then very prominent voices came out, like Sir Martin Ryle, saying that these attempts can be a bit hazardous for the human race. It's a bit hazardous maybe to reveal our location and our existence to other species. And then the famous Stephen Hawking came out and said, this is an incautious broadcasting of our whereabouts. And he warned that it could be a potential similar scenario to when Columbus landed in America. It wasn't so great for the natives of the land. He also said that predatory aliens statistically are as likely as friendly ones. And Lewis Thomas, who was an American physician, I'd like to quote what he said, "What kinds of questions should we ask? There is no end to the list. But the main question will remain the opener. Hello? Are you there? If the reply should turn out to be yes, hello, we might want to stop and think about that for quite a long time." Now, my final example, Perseverance rover. A present, recent day one, Perseverance rover was sent in July of 2020 to study the evolution of the planet Mars. And this was probably the highlight of the lockdown era for me, personally. The symbols on Perseverance were a clear example of a huge generational shift between the 1970s and 2020. There's the rise of social media. There's a huge PR stunt by NASA to get the audience engaged and get the audience excited. And the symbols were masked for other sentient beings, but the real audience was really an earthbound one, which was a growing popular space enthusiast culture on Earth. So it had everything a message needed, you know, an ode to the past and also a message of hope and a lot more. There's a lot of Easter eggs on Pioneer, so I do recommend you to look into that. But I'm going to focus today on the Mastcam Z, which you see on screen. And it's a camera module with a metal plate that's usually used to calibrate lenses. So as you see, we have another narrative of humanity, and we find the mission motto, which is 2 worlds, 1 beginning, a reference to the idea that, you know, we are planetary siblings. We are scientifically made of the same dust that Mars was made of. So by extension, any creatures we find on Mars could be our cousins. And then we have an abbreviated diagram of the solar system. We have the DNA strand, again, which is representing to both life on Earth and life we hope to find on Mars. And then it spills to life, different forms of life on Earth. You have the bacteria, the fern, the dinosaur, the humans who will presumably ride the rocket ship from the blue calibration circle, as you see on screen, towards the red, representing Perseverance's journey from the blue planet to the red one, from Earth to Mars. Now, a few minor points to end with Perseverance. The English language, 2 worlds, 1 beginning, and the ode to the pioneer couple with a newly liberated woman who's standing and greeting as well, waving back. It made it very clear that the target audience here is a human one. And what was a bit dry and serious in Pioneer became satirical, almost funny in Perseverance. But the underlying message is really the same. You know, we're here and we matter, but with no understood them, the story really is still about us. So I'd like to end with just saying that we're in a really exciting time for space exploration. You know, the private sector's entry into space with SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin, so forth. The James Webb Telescope, the Artemis missions, the quest to Mars. The list goes on, and it's also an exciting time for our country because we have 2 astronauts going into space, hopefully in 2023. But the outcome of my work so far in my research is that I've realized that every time we take a look into outer space, whether from an anthropological lens or even a scientific approach, we always find ourselves looking back. The conclusion of my work so far is as follows. Our interpretation of the cosmos and our desires to explore the unknown has the potential to reveal truths about our own species. And these shots in the dark and these examples that I just gave are very reflective in nature, in the sense that there's a beautiful juxtaposition here. The more we explore and venture into outer space, the more we slowly uncover our very own story as humans. And these messages, although they're intended for other sentient beings, the lens has really shifted back and zoomed at us. And at this stage, we find ourselves answering back ourselves. And the answer is always a mirror of who we are during each era, where we seem to be going, and inevitably where we come from. These images always remind me of a very primordial man in nature, you know, a depiction of the nature of us, you know, like the carvings of early man stating a very simple fact. I'm here, I mattered, and the question remains, what does this say about us, really? So I want to end with this rhetorical question. What does this say about us? Thank you. Dr. Arnold.
Good evening, and thank you for your very inspiring contribution. In fact, it's probably better to engage the debate, but I only try to make some complement to your talk. My name is Jacques Arnaud. I'm working for the French Space Agency. As I mentioned always, it's a French NASA. And I'm lucky to have a very singular position in CNES, the Centre National d'Études Spatiales, as ethic advisor. And my position is trying to participate to the philosophical reflection, ethical reflection concerning the space activities. And today I try to make a compliment to your talk, trying to introduce a reflection about exploration. Because messaging, in one way, is a way to explore. And it's not without question about the fact that we try to explore and perhaps more in space. Only in my mind, I have now a little story. You know probably that I don't remember at which occasion, probably an anniversary of Voyager.
Yeah.
NASA asked people to elaborate a new message, and you know this message.
The new one.
Yes, a new one to be sent and to complete this one. And this message, the final message selected was coming from a little boy, and it was, "You are not alone."
Yeah.
And I think it's very interesting, trying to say, it's not, we are not waiting on you, but we are giving you this message. Yeah. You are not alone. And I think it's a very nice image of what we try to introduce in space. I don't know if you know that in 2025, China will launch a new space probe to an asteroid and to bring back samples from this asteroid. And the name of this, the actual name of this space probe is Tianwan-2. Tianwan means astronomy. This probe is a way to enrich our knowledge in astronomy. But the first name chosen at the beginning of this mission was Cheng-Ho. Cheng-Ho is the name of a very famous sailors in China from the 14th century. You know probably the story. It's an incredible story. It means that at the beginning of the 14th century, China launched 7 expeditions from the east to the west, and Cheng-Ho was the Grand Admiral of this expedition. And in 7 expeditions, he was sending hundreds of junk from China to India, to Arabic country, and even to South Africa. And perhaps some of the junk are crossing what we name now the Good Hope Cap. But it's a possibility. And you know that during the 7th expedition, the last expedition, Cheng-Ho reached Jeddah and perhaps Mecca, due to the fact that the family of Cheng-Ho was Muslims, and the father of Cheng-Ho, we are sure, makes the trip to Mecca. My question is, and after the 7th, Cheng-Ho died, and the emperor of China was different and decided to stop with this very expensive expedition. And after this time, China closed its frontiers, and it was the end of this time of exploration, of discovery coming from China. And the story was different, and it was the story of the discovery of the New World by Occident. I mentioned Cheng-Ho trying to make a comparison with Neil Armstrong. You mentioned Apollo mission, Apollo program, Frank Borman, Neil Armstrong. We can make a comparison between Cheng Ho and Armstrong. In fact, it's not the same story. Cheng Ho, with his very incredible fleet, huge chunk, the bigger chunk was 111 meters long. You know, the same size as Saturn V or Artemis. And few decades after, with the famous Santa Maria with Christopher Columbus, it's not the same size. Santa Maria was 25 meters long. The junk was 111 meters. But Cheng Ho was not Neil Armstrong. He explored territory where it was people, population, people in Mecca. He tried to engage new relation between China and all these countries, between India, Arabic Peninsula, and the other in the direction of the south of Africa. He tried to do that in an economical spirit, perhaps also peaceful spirit. It was not an exploration, it was not totally a conquest, something between. And if I mention this page of the Chinese history, it's due to the fact that today we are more in the context of Cheng Ho than in the context of Neil Armstrong. Because space activities, space companies, space industry are trying to engage commercialization and perhaps in the future exploitation of celestial body, space resources. Now you mentioned that with this very nice image of star, the traditional GPS you said in your country. Shows that today GPS or Galileo or other systems are very useful for us. It's a way to exploit space. But going from exploration to conquest to exploitation and perhaps in the future colonization on other planets, it means a lot of ethical question. What is the future of humankind on our ethics if we begin or if we pursue this exploitation of space? That's the reason we have to introduce more and more ethical interrogation in our space activities. By ethics, I mean interrogation. Not immediately a decision to say, okay, you can do that, but it's forbidden to do that. It's only the consequence of the interrogation. Interrogation, and the first question is why? Why we decide to explore, to exploit, to conquest, to colonize, perhaps? What's the raison d'être, the very nice term in French? And the goal. The second question is how? What are you using as means? Technique, economic budget, people, to realize your objective, your project. And the third question is, what are the consequences? Some consequences, okay, you are waiting on they are positive, it's a result you are trying to obtain, but sometimes you have bad consequences. And how you manage that? It belongs to ethics. I have no time to tell you the brief story of ethics in space, but it's very interesting because in this world of engineer, always ready to obtain a new success and to, okay, we can do that, we try and you succeed to do that. It's very necessary to introduce the first question, the why question. I remember a very interesting report 10 years ago, published by an American expert in space activities, and he explained, it was a very concrete report about the American space industry and space programs, but he precised that if we forget to precise the goals, the objectives, it's very risky.
Yeah.
Because if you meet any difficulties, you don't know what you have to do. And especially in space, where we have very nice destination, the moon, Mars, and beyond. But if it remains only destination, it's very risky. So it's my job, and I think it's not only my job, it's our responsibility. Never forget to precise, to remember, to renew our goal to go in space, to explore, perhaps to exploit, and to colonize. Exploration, is essential. I say it's probably something very specific to the human species.
Yeah.
Until now. Perhaps in the future, but until now. Because exploring, it's combining two virtues.
Yeah.
Virtues is what motivates you. And first is curiosity. Curiosity is very common in life. If you have a domestic animal, it's always very curious. Okay. But human species, we are combining curiosity with another virtue, is imagination. And imagination is something very specific to our species. To this capacity to go in another space, in another time. Imagination. We never explore something we have not imagined before. And so if you combine curiosity and exploration, curiosity and imagination, you have exploration. Exploration has also two qualities, probably other, but first is a question of searching our origin. You can read so many stories of explorers trying to find the sources of some river, or the summit of the mountain, because everything is coming from the summit of the mountain, descending. And in case of Mars, it's very clear.
Yeah.
We are sending probes on Mars as Perseverance or the other to find life, to know more about life and our own life on Earth.
Yeah.
And the second quality is a question of responsibility. If we explore, if we are trying to bring our flag on the summit of mountain, or perhaps on the moon or on Mars, it's not a question of conquering, to appropriate this place. For me, it's always a question of responsibility.
Yeah.
When we say space is a common heritage of humankind, it belongs to the Space Treaty, it never means that we are trying to appropriate space, to appropriate the moon or Mars. It first remembering that we are responsible of what we are doing on Mars today. But at the same time, don't forget conquering, the conquest. Conquest is not only appropriation. Conquest sometimes means also conquering more intelligence, more witness, more science. And we know that in space, we need more and more science, or we provide more and more data for science. And conquering is never easy. That's the reason I defend the fact that we can always maintain this idea of conquest, even if we know that it's a question of responsibility. Some limits or some protection, planetary protection, belong to space activity. As a very brief conclusion, let me return to Chung-ho and his probably visit to Mecca. For me, the final goal of exploration is probably summarized in this story, in this visit of Chung-ho in Mecca. Exploring is probably trying to find the final goal. The final goal is not science. A French writer, Victor Hugo, trying to explain what is science, said science is only an asymptote to truth. Asymptote means that you are trying to approach the truth, but you never touch the truth. And I think that exploration as Chung-ho in Mecca, perhaps Chung-ho at this time arrived at the goal. I mean, it's meta-science, metaphysics, meta-biology, something as transcendence. And perhaps when you mention overview effect, it's something linked with this goal.
Yeah.
It's an inner travel as an outside travel, and by this way is in connection with ethics.
Yeah.
And okay, thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Very interesting. Thank you.
And I think that now we have to answer to your question.
Yes,
Sort of
I also have a
message.
question for you, but maybe after. I have a question, actually, just let's follow up after what you said. So just to understand, so we have an innate nature as humans to explore. So probably Chung-ho would have been at the depths of space had he had the technology now, right?
Yeah, sure.
And I feel like it's our innate nature as humans to be explorers, but we're at the point where, you know, we're even I always like to make a comparison between nomads and astronauts. In terms of the mind and the soul, they're doing a similar thing.
Sure.
But in two very different contexts.
Yeah, sure.
But the innate nature of us as humans is the same. We're explorers.
Yes, the same, and it's the same time some different. That's
Okay.
the reason that I say Chung-ho is not is not Neil Armstrong.
Okay.
Due to the fact that he is going in first human territory.
Yeah.
And not totally unknown.
Yeah.
And because explorer is really exploring in the very strict sense,
Yeah.
is going where a known territory, perhaps without human species.
Yeah.
And something more is going back and telling your story.
Yeah.
It's a permanent movement. Explorers are going outside the human frontier
Yeah.
one time, going back saying, okay, I touch this new frontier, and now it's your job, the next generation,
To go
cross the
further.
frontier and to push the frontier
Okay.
beyond and beyond.
Okay.
And never forget to tell your story.
Yeah.
What is very, very strange today, and with your message, it's an example, that today we have the capacity to send messages very far from the Earth and to explore without human presence. I mean, bodily presence.
Yeah.
And today we can explore Mars
Yeah.
without being on Mars.
With the
because-
rover,
with
robots.
And it's really incredible.
Yeah.
I was speaking with some scientists a few days ago of the moment in 1977 when NASA received the first picture from Viking
Yeah.
from Mars
Mars.
surface. And we never, it's the first time we have a very concrete picture from the surface of Mars without human on Mars, only receiving from this little, or not little, a very big probe, Viking. And I suppose it was an extraordinary moment for the scientists from NASA, line after line, to see this red planet for the first time with a picture. And so today, exploring as a new aspect, a new dimension. That's the reason we want to give a message, because we know that it's not so far. It seems not so far. And we need, as you mentioned at the beginning, artists, poets, philosophers, to think about this new way of exploring. Even if some people, as you mentioned, Stephen Hawking also say, oh, it's very dangerous. Probably it's not without risk. But it's human. We have now the capacity to send message very far, and it's a way to say, trying to explore this universe. It's human.
To get our story beyond.
Yes.
To archive us, Okay.
I have a question, and I know there is no answer for it. With all the respect to all the scientists who have genius minds, ideas about writing on the disk or the satellite that's been sent to space, if we are here on Earth and we are different beings like us, animals, and insects, and they don't see like us, they don't hear like us, they don't communicate the way we do, and every segment of the actual being were created on this earth, they have a different language. What made the scientists believe that what they're going to send is going to be read by another being who doesn't have the same eyes, the same hearing system, the same vibes and everything? How is that even possible? I've had that question for 25 years in my mind, and I never got an answer for it, and I know it doesn't have an answer, but just what was they going in their mind? And it's in English. Fine. And then they send all the other languages, which is fine, but how do we know that those people, well, not people, those beings, they're going to communicate the way we do?
Well, I would say this is exactly why I call them shots in the dark. That's why the main topic was shot in the dark, because they are shots in the dark. They are attempts. There's no answer, but what's interesting is that I've realized throughout my work on messaging is that it was never really intended for other sentient beings. The conclusion is it's more about us than the other. We're learning more about who we are as humans through these messages than actually having someone find them. But, as Dr. Arnold said, it's just an innate human feeling that we have, that we want to set forth to the great beyond and further into other frontiers. So we're just exploring and expressing that innate feeling we have as humans. The question isn't has someone, of course it would be interesting to know if someone found it or not, but what I can tell you from my work till today is that it's not about them. It's inevitably about us. It's a mirror of us. So we've answered back, in my humble opinion so far. We've answered back. But I'll also let Dr. Arnold answer.
No, it's a very interesting question, and as you mentioned, we don't have the answer.
We don't have an answer.
Yesterday, when I arrived in the airport, I discovered that in the same plane was a lot of French scientists, French archaeologists. It's a 20th anniversary of archaeology in France and in your country. Okay. As me, you know that archaeology is based on trash. People are, what we try to find in the old city and old campment is a lot are coming from trash. People never think that they are that 1 century, 2 century, 1 millennium after, we are trying to know something about them, but it was not the message. It's what they left at this time. I think that by sending this sort of message, we know that it's more about us than for you. But it's a way to say you are not alone, as this little boy say, nothing more. And even it's better than nothing. Trying to manage this possible space and time capsule sent in space and time. Nothing more. And we try to do with what we have. Sound, picture, a gold disc, okay. And if we can ask animals to do the same, why not? But we have some difficulties to explain that to them. But you're right, and I think that the scientists have they know that. They know that they have no idea of the other, of the language, of the technology, but we take time, a few weeks first and more at the second occasion. We take time to manage something. It's only a gift. You are not alone, nothing more. Archaeology for the future.
First of all, thank you very much for really inspiring thoughts and very intellectually enriching information and knowledge that you've shared with us on this great cosmos. Even though I work in earthly space, I work in the oil and gas business in Saudi Aramco. But the subject of outer space is fascinating for me, and hopefully one day, upon our conquest of the outer space, we will find some natural resources that we can utilize for the benefit of mankind. So the question that I have is in relation with a great novelist and philosopher and thinker, Joseph Campbell, and the father of modern mythology. And one of his books called The Power of Myth. It's a classic book that inspires many of the novels and the movies we see about the stars and all what goes with it. So he traces man or mankind passion for the cosmos to the mythologies of nations throughout history. And he examined in his classic book, I think it's like 2,000-page book, the mythology that comes from many different parts from the world, China, India, Egypt, South America, and came to the conclusion that there is a very strong correlation between what we are trying to discover space and the mythologies that these nations have over centuries. So I would like to hear your thoughts. And one example he's citing, a great civilization and empire like the Inca in Peru in South America, very sophisticated and very well established, suddenly collapsed with the Spanish conquest, because in their myth that when the Spanish came, they thought that these people actually came from outer space, and so they gave up voluntarily. Their emperor surrendered to the Spanish commander and said, go ahead, because of that kind of belief. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about mythologies of nations and what we are trying now to discover and accomplish, if it's possible. Thank you very much.
After you.
Thank you for your remark, very interesting. In my culture, because for me this possibility to share during this day or different culture is very necessary for the future. In my culture, the 7th century was very important. It was a scientific revolution due to astronomers as Galileo or Kepler. And at this occasion, it was a very important evolution. Until this time, people have the idea that cosmos belonged to the gods, divinity, and was forbidden for humankind. But after, due to the scientific discovery, especially when they discover that it's not a cosmos, but a universe with unique matters, unique rules, that sky was open to our species. And by this way, they don't be afraid by people coming from outside. They have to discover, we have to discover that we belong to the same reality. And it's a way to go forward. It's not without difficulties. Until now, we have always alien, not only in space, but also on Earth. But that's, for me, the key, to discover that we belong to the same universe. We have so many relations between us that we have to try to elaborate relation. Again, we are not alone. It's a way to echo to the previous question. But it's a big job. But in this case, in this science provides something. It's not enough, but it's a very real contribution at this time and now to go in this direction. So only not to answer you, but to complete your remark. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
Hi.
So thank you for this deep presentation and debate. And I would... je peux poser ma question en français?
Oui, bien sûr.
Ah, ok. Je me sens à l'aise et rassembler mes idées. Donc, ma question, c'est beaucoup plus, je vais évoquer, je vais dans le sens que vous avez évoqué, la question de responsabilité et éthique. Et quand vous avez, je pense, conseiller ou bien expert dans ce domaine, donc je vais un peu développer ce que le matin le professeur Abdullah Ghadami a déjà fait ou bien discuté. On sait que toutes les recherches ou bien les explorations ou bien les découvertes scientifiques concernant l'espace et les conquêtes de l'espace, c'est fabriqué ou bien c'est produit dans des labos militaires. Moi, je suis un docteur en sciences politiques, j'enseigne la géopolitique et on fait dans les derniers cours ce qu'on appelle la géotechnique et comment la géopolitique deviendra quelque chose de conflit, d'espace, etc. Newman qui a développé ce concept de cyber, c'est dans les labos militaires américains en 1942. Il a fait son ouvrage qui est maintenant référence. Donc ma question dans ce sens, comment on peut éthiquer l'espace, les découvertes, et que l'essence de ces découvertes sont militaires, sont à des fins militaires. Et je rappelle ce que Heidegger a déjà dit, que l'essence de la technique n'est pas technique. Donc la technique n'est pas quelque chose de neutre. Et comme moi je suis spécialiste dans les sciences politiques, je cherche tout ce qui est politique. Donc c'est dans ce sens, professeur, comment on peut réconcilier ce dilemme entre éthique et découverte à des fins militaires. Et merci.
Thank you for your question. You introduce a very interesting point, is the fact that the military dimension of space, if I can summarize your question in few words, and it's a real challenge due to a very concrete and historical fact that today space activities is, the roots of space activity is military objective, military goal. Everybody knows the name of von Braun.
Yeah.
Herbert von Braun was a German engineer engaged in the Second World War, and he developed the V2, and the roots of the not the American program, but his contribution to the Apollo mission, Apollo program, and the contribution of the German engineer for the Soviet Union was the same, and the contribution of this German engineer to the French space program is very clear. So, in fact, the foundation of space activity is military, or is a war. And it's always the case today. In space, we are naming that the dual situation of space, the fact that civil activities and military activities are totally articulated and integrated. It's a challenge. I mean, we can say, oh, it's very negative, but it's also some positive aspect. I explain. I remember 25 years ago when I integrated the French Space Agency, and people say, okay, you are in charge of ethics. I immediately say, okay, what is my domain of interest? We have Earth observation, telecommunication, space debris, human space flight, and immediately I said, okay, a military aspect. Why military? Because it belongs to our job. Even if 20 years ago, we not really communicate about this military aspect of space. Because in our mind, military activities are secret. Okay, we know they exist. We have not to speak about. No, I say, for me, it belongs to the space domain. And I discover that year after year, this aspect of our activities, even as civil agency, but in connection with the French army, and today we have a space French army, it's became public, and it's very interesting to do that. People everywhere know that today, yes, space activities are engaged in the military dimension of our societies. It's a first step to say, okay, it's not a secret, and we can perhaps have debate, discussion concerning this aspect. It's not immediately to attack people or to destroy satellites. It's to communicate, to observe, to spy, to engage pacific action too. But for me, the first, when I say it's an ethical interrogation, in this we have to be lucid about our activities, about the consequence of our activities. And perhaps we can introduce some influence. You know that today all the collaboration between Russia and a great part of the world are totally destroyed. 2 days after the beginning of the war in Ukraine, all the Russian team in Guyana, in the French space port, all the team was called back in Russia. It was the end of the collaboration between French and Russia concerning Guyana. One of the unique places of collaboration today between Russia, United States, Europe is in space, in the International Space Station. It means that our civil activities have some influence or are in contradiction with diplomacy, or not diplomacy, war activities, and I hope that perhaps they have some influence on diplomacy. So this connection is not always bad. Sometimes it could have, I hope so, positive influence. Yes. But you know that it's always in movement, always in evolution. I don't know if you want to add something. Don't hesitate.
It's your field, so
no. Not
no,
in my
I'm
field.
personally interested because I do think ethics is such a vital part of any space program, and I do fear, as someone who's enthusiastic about space, and you know that is it going to be a mirror to what's going on on Earth or not?
Yes.
And there's a lot going up there that is a mirror, unfortunately, of what's happening here. But at the same time, it opens more room for discussion, for solutions of things here on Earth as well. So it's an integral part of the program. So, yeah.
What you mentioned now is very interesting. It's a mirror.
Yeah.
Because it's a modern view of space.
Yeah.
Because during a long time, space was more, or sky, or cosmos was a screen on which we are project some dreams, positive or negative dreams. We are fearing about what arrives from sky. But now, due to the fact that we are launching a lot of probes, satellites, some astronauts, it's also a mirror now.
Yeah.
And it's very important to remember that. When people say, oh, you are bringing war in space or space debris.
Or, space debris.
I'm sorry, it's the same on Earth. And perhaps
unfortunately,
what we are learning in space, that's the reason I mentioned the ISS, it's a positive action. Perhaps when we are learning in space, could have some influence on Earth. It's only, as you mentioned, a question of mirror.
I do also believe that a lot of people that work in the industry and have these experiences, as I mentioned, like the overview effect, you're looking at Earth without borders. You look at a home instead of, as I said, a country or a nation or an individual or an institution. And these ties that you form up there with other... So I want to quote Chris Hadfield again. I'm a big fan of Colonel Chris Hadfield. So he said something really interesting in his master class. He said, when you're on the space station or any spacecraft, you're not a passenger. You're a crew member. That means I'm responsible for the safety and the well-being of everybody on that spacecraft. So imagine coming back to Earth with that same mentality. I'm not a passenger here. I'm a crew member. I'm responsible for the safety and the well-being of everyone around me. So these internal transitions and shifts in consciousness that happen up there have a huge effect on Earth. Of course, it's on such a small scale because we only have a handful of people going to space. But if it happens on a grounder scale, as we said, if we do go to these endeavors to, the great beyond, to the Artemis mission, the quest for Mars, you're going to see larger groups of people going out there, and probably a shift of consciousness will happen, and they'll view the Earth in a different matter. Hopefully, this will inevitably make it a bit of a better place.
Totally agree with that.
Okay.
So thank you for your
Thank you so
presence.
much, everyone. Thank you. Yeah.
And don't forget that you have to imagine a message.
Yes.
You ask for that.
Why don't you think of that for, a couple of days? I mean, it's a rhetorical question. Think of it. If you were to send a symbol of the human race to space, what would it be?
It's for you.
Well, it's interesting because he mentioned a man and a woman, and it did happen in Pioneer, and there was an interesting discourse that happened because of that. So, yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Arnaud. Thank you so much.